The crystal glass trembled, almost imperceptibly, in his hand. Not from age, not from infirmity, but from a tension that coiled deep in the muscles of his forearm, a place where a faded emblem of a striking serpent, intertwined with a dagger, lay hidden beneath the worn fabric of his best and only suit jacket. He was a ghost at this feast, a specter of a life lived before this one, before the polished floors and the saccharine smiles. He watched his daughter, Amelia, step up to the podium, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the stage lights, a vision in silk and youthful confidence. The room, a cavernous banquet hall dripping with the casual opulence of new money, fell into a respectful hush. Her stepfather, a man named Marcus whose smile was as expensive as his watch, beamed from the front table, a proud patriarch presiding over his domain. The father, whose name was Jacob, stood near the back, by his service door, a position he instinctively sought in any room, a place with a clear line of sight and an easy exit. He wasn't part of the celebration. He was merely a witness to it, a condition of his visitation rights. Amelia cleared her throat, her bright eyes scanning the sea of adoring faces. Faces of people who knew her as the stepdaughter of Marcus Thorne, the titan of tech, the philanthropist of the year. Her eyes swept right past Jacob, a brief, dismissive flicker that felt louder than any shout. And then she began to speak, her voice clear and strong, weaving a tale of gratitude and love. She spoke of the man who had taught her sail, who had funded her dreams, who had shown her what a real father could be. And as she reached the crescendo of her speech, a carefully rehearsed moment of emotional revelation, she turned her gaze directly to the head table, to Marcus. "So I just want to thank my mom for everything," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I want to thank the man who has been my rock, my guide, my inspiration, the only man I have ever truly called my dad." The words hit Jacob with the force of a physical blow, a concussive wave that seemed to suck the air from his lungs. The only dad. The room erupted in applause, a thunderous ovation for a beautiful moment of manufactured sentiment. Marcus stood, blew a kiss to Amelia, and tapped his heart, the picture of magnanimous fatherhood. Jacob didn't move. He simply stood there, the ghost of the feast, as the applause washed over him. The glass in his hand was steady now. The tremor was gone, replaced by an absolute chilling stillness. To them, he was just an old man in a cheap suit, a forgotten relic of a past his daughter had chosen to erase. But what they didn't know, what Amelia in her youthful cruelty and Marcus in his arrogant ignorance could never comprehend, was the truth of the man who stood by the service door. They couldn't see the history etched into the lines around his eyes, a history of watching over men in the darkest nights imaginable. They couldn't understand the meaning of the faded tattoo on his arm, a symbol whispered about in the most elite and shadowed corners of the world's military forces. They had just dismissed a man who had walked through fire and shadow so that men like Marcus could build their glittering empires and children like Amelia could sleep safely in their beds. He had asked for nothing. He had never spoken of his past. But in that moment, as the applause for his replacement echoed in his ears, a cold, hard certainty settled in his soul. He had not sought this moment, but it had found him, and as he watched his daughter embrace her only dad, he made a quiet, solemn vow. She would learn the truth. She would understand the nature of sacrifice. She would come to regret this day, not because of his anger, but because of the crushing weight of a truth she had so carelessly thrown away. The story doesn't end here. In this moment of quiet injustice, it begins. Welcome to our channel. If you believe that honor is earned, not given, and that true strength lies in quiet dignity, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, because you won't want to miss what happens next. The life Jacob now lived was a study in deliberate simplicity, a world whittled down to the essentials. His apartment, a small second-story walk-up above a quiet bakery, smelled of sawdust from his workshop and old books. There were no medals on the wall, no framed photographs of him in uniform, no memorabilia from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The only hint of his past was in his movements, the way he rose before the sun, the economy of motion in every task, the quiet discipline that governed his days. He worked as a carpenter, a master of his craft. His hands, which had once field-stripped a rifle in pitch darkness, now planed wood with a surgeon's precision. He found a quiet solace in creation, in bringing order and form out of raw material. It was the opposite of his former life, a life of deconstruction. His clients were local families, small businesses, people who knew him as the quiet man who did good work for a fair price. They saw the slight limp in his right leg, a relic of what he privately called his retirement party, a helicopter crash on a nameless mountain range that had ended his career. They saw the deep-set weariness in his eyes, but they mistook it for sadness, not vigilance. They didn't see the ghost of the man he had been, the man designated Spectre, the leader of a Tier 1 unit so clandestine it was officially denied to exist, a unit known only by a number and a symbol, the Serpent's Dagger. This simple life was a fortress he had built around himself, a way to keep the echoes of the past at bay. But the biggest reason for this quiet existence was Amelia. After the divorce, when her mother had met and married Marcus Thorne, Jacob had watched his daughter being drawn into a different world, a world of glittering surfaces and effortless privilege. He saw how Marcus, with his casual charisma and bottomless wallet, had captivated her. He couldn't compete with that. He wouldn't even try. What could he offer? Stories he could never tell? Lessons learned in places that didn't appear on any map? So he receded. He became the weekend dad, then the holiday dad, then the occasional phone call dad. He did it because he thought it was what she wanted, what she needed. He thought his silence, his distance, was a form of protection, a way to let her have this bright, shiny new life without the shadows of his own. He never imagined that she would interpret his silence as absence, his humility as weakness, his quiet dignity as a source of shame. In contrast, Marcus Thorne's life was an open book, a glossy, best-selling biography of success. His mansion was a testament to his achievements, a sprawling estate of glass and steel overlooking the city. His philanthropy was a public spectacle, his name emblazoned on hospital wings and university libraries. He was the epitome of modern power, visible, celebrated, and deeply, profoundly certain of his own importance. He treated Jacob with a kind of benevolent condescension, the way a king might treat a harmless peasant from a forgotten province. He called him buddy and pal, clapped him on the shoulder a little too hard, and spoke to him in simple, slow sentences as if English were his second language. Marcus had built his empire in the bright, sunlit world of code and commerce, a world of predictable inputs and profitable outputs. He could not comprehend a world that operated in the gray, a world of sacrifice and silence, where victory was measured not in stock points, but in the quiet breathing of the men standing next to you. His ignorance was not malicious, not entirely. It was a simple, unbreachable arrogance of a man who had never been tested, who had never had to look into the abyss and hold the line. He was a man made of glass, and he was about to collide with a man made of stone. The chasm between these two worlds, between the quiet carpenter and the tech titan, had now become a battleground, and Amelia had planted her flag firmly in the soil of her stepfather's glittering kingdom, leaving her true father a man alone, a king in a country of one. His quiet life a silent testament to a code of honor she had just publicly disavowed. The roots of Amelia's decision had grown slowly, subtly, watered by the constant sunshine of Marcus's world. It wasn't a single moment of betrayal, but 1,000 tiny shifts in perspective. When her mother first introduced her to Marcus, she was a teenager navigating the confusing aftermath of her parents' divorce. Jacob, her father, had become quieter, more distant. He was there, but he wasn't. His conversations were sparse, his explanations for his past vague and unsatisfying. He seemed haunted by something she couldn't see, a sadness that clung to him like the scent of wood shavings on his clothes. Then came Marcus, a whirlwind of energy and charm. He didn't just talk, he narrated. He didn't just live, he performed. He bought her a pony, then a car. He took her on vacations to places she had only seen in magazines. He spoke of ambition, of legacy, of changing the world. He presented a vision of life that was expansive and exciting, a stark contrast to her father's world, which seemed to be shrinking, becoming more confined and silent with each passing year. She began to see her father's quietness not as dignity, but as a lack of ambition. His simple job wasn't a choice for a peaceful life, but a failure to achieve more. His limp wasn't a mark of sacrifice, but a symbol of his fragility. She started to internalize Marcus's view of the world, a world where value was measured in visibility, in financial success, in applause of the crowd. Jacob's world had no such metrics. How could she explain her father to her new, sophisticated friends? My dad is a carpenter. It sounded so small. My stepfather is Marcus Thorne. That opened doors. That elicited gasps of admiration. The narrative was seductive. Marcus was a hero of this new story. And in every good story, there needs to be a foil, an obstacle, a representation of the past that must be overcome. Unconsciously, she began to cast her own father in that role. He became the before picture in the story of her after. The process was accelerated by Marcus's own subtle campaign. He never spoke ill of Jacob directly. He was too clever for that. Instead, he used praise as a weapon. Your dad is a simple man, Amelia, he'd say. And there's a real nobility in that, I think, to be content with so little. He would offer to help Jacob, to invest in his little workshop. An offer framed as generosity, but delivered with a subtext of pity. He created a narrative where Jacob was a charity case, a fixer-upper project, someone to be managed and tolerated. Amelia, wanting to belong in this new, powerful world, accepted the narrative. She began to feel embarrassed when Jacob would show up for school events in his work clothes, a smudge of sawdust on his cheek. She would cringe at his quiet, observant presence in rooms filled with loud, important people. Her shame metastasized into resentment. Why couldn't he be more like Marcus? Why couldn't he try? The final step was the erasure. It became easier to simply omit him from her life story than to try and explain him. She stopped mentioning him to her friends. She forgot to invite him to small get-togethers. The public declaration at the banquet was not a spontaneous emotional outburst. It was a logical conclusion of a long and deliberate process of rewriting her own history. It was a final declarative sentence in a story she had been crafting for years, a story in which she was a self-made daughter of a great man, a story that required her to render her true father invisible. But she had made a critical error. She assumed his silence was emptiness. She mistook his humility for weakness. She had no idea that the man she had just erased was more real, more substantial, and infinitely more dangerous in his quiet resolve than the glittering hologram she had chosen to call Dad. She had judged the book by its plain, worn cover, never once suspecting the epic story of courage and sacrifice written on the pages within. And now, the book was about to be opened for all the world to see. A week after the banquet, the sting of his daughter's words had settled into a low, constant ache. It wasn't the sharp pain of a fresh wound anymore, but the deep, resonant throb of an old one. Jacob did not call Amelia. He did not text. An angry confrontation would be pointless. It would only feed the narrative that he was bitter and unstable, confirming everything Marcus had likely insinuated about him. He knew that the only currency he had was his dignity, a currency his daughter no longer seemed to value, but one he would not devalue himself. Instead, he channeled his resolve into his work. He had been crafting a gift for Amelia for months, a graduation present she had now received a year late, because the right moment had never come. It was a handcrafted jewelry box, made from a single piece of reclaimed bird's-eye maple, a wood that shimmered with a depth that seemed to move under the light. The joinery was perfect, seamless. Inside, he had lined it with deep blue velvet, the color of her eyes when she was a little girl. And on the underside of the lid, he had painstakingly inlaid a single, small star, a replica of a constellation they used to watch from the back porch of their old house. It was more than a box. It was a memory, a testament to a time before. He wrapped it carefully in simple brown paper and drove to the Thorne estate. He didn't want a confrontation. He just wanted to leave it for her, a final, quiet message. He pulled up to the imposing gates and buzzed the intercom. A crisp, impersonal voice answered. He stated his name and his purpose. After a long pause, the gates swung open. He was instructed to leave the package at the front door. As he approached the towering entrance, the door opened, but it wasn't a housekeeper who stood there. It was Marcus. "Jacob, buddy," he said, his voice oozing a practiced sympathy. "To what do we owe the pleasure?" Jacob held out the package. "It's for Amelia." Marcus took it, his expression a careful mask of polite interest. He weighed it in his hand. "A little light, isn't it?" he said with a chuckle. "Her new Tesla came last week. From me." He started to unwrap the gift right there on the doorstep. "Marcus, don't," Jacob said, his voice low and even. "It's for her." Of course," Marcus said, peeling away the paper to reveal the maple box. He held it up, turning it over in his hands. His smile was condescending. "Oh, you made this? That's quaint. Really, a throwback." He opened the lid and saw the velvet lining. "Amelia has a lot of jewelry, Jacob. A lot. Most of it won't fit in this." He ran a finger over the inlaid star. His expression one of faint amusement. "Look, I appreciate the thought. I really do," he said, handing the box back to Jacob. "But this isn't her world anymore. She's moved on. It's time you did too." Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Amelia. Her voice was cold, distant, rehearsed. "I need you to stop," she said, without preamble. "Stop what?" Jacob asked, his heart sinking. "Stop trying. Stop showing up. Stop leaving these things. Marcus told me about the box. It's just embarrassing, Dad." The word Dad was a clinical, detached label stripped of all warmth. "There's a big charity gala next month at the museum. It's honoring Marcus. Please don't come. It will be awkward for everyone." The line went dead before he could respond. He stood in his quiet workshop, the scent of maple and varnish in the air. He looked down at the box in his hands, at the single, perfect star. Awkward, embarrassing. That's what he was to her now. He placed the box on his workbench. For a long moment, he considered smashing it, letting all the quiet pain and frustration out in one violent act. But that was not his way. His way was quieter, more disciplined. He would not be erased. He would not be dismissed. He would go to the gala. He would not go to make a scene. He would not go to confront her. He would go for the same reason he had stood in the back of the banquet hall, to be a witness. He would bear witness to the world she had chosen. And in doing so, he would force her to bear witness to the man she had thrown away. The night of the gala arrived, cloaked in the manufactured elegance that defined Marcus Thorne's world. The city's main art museum had been transformed, its hallowed halls of culture serving as a backdrop for a celebration of wealth. Light spilled from the grand arched windows onto a red carpet swarming with the city's elite. Jacob arrived not by limousine, but by city bus, stepping onto the curb a block away. He wore the same suit, his only suit, pressed and clean but unmistakably out of place amongst a sea of bespoke tuxedos and designer gowns. He hadn't come for them. He held no ticket, no invitation. He walked past the clamor of the main entrance, his limp a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the frenetic energy of the paparazzi. He knew this building. He had helped with renovation here years ago, before his hands had become too stiff for the fine detail work. He knew its service corridors, its back entrances, the geography of its hidden spaces. He slipped through an unlocked service door, the clang of the metal echoing behind him as he entered the quiet, utilitarian backstage of the event. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors with an innate sense of direction, emerging into main hall through a small, curtained alcove reserved for staff. From here, he could see everything. The room was a galaxy of glittering people, their laughter like the clinking of ice in expensive glasses. Waiters, dressed in stark black and white, moved through the crowd like silent satellites. One of them, a young man no older than Amelia, caught Jacob's eye. The boy was new, nervous, his movement stiff with concentration. As he passed Jacob's alcove, he nearly dropped a tray of champagne flutes. Jacob's hand shot out, not grabbing, but steadying the tray with firm, calm pressure. "Easy, son," Jacob said, his voice barely a whisper. "Breathe. Scan your sector. Move with purpose." The young waiter looked at him, startled. He saw the cheap suit, the weathered face, the slight limp, but he also saw something else. He saw the absolute stillness in the man's eyes, the quiet authority in his voice. He saw the faded, intricate tattoo of a serpent and a dagger that was momentarily exposed as the man's sleeve slid back. The waiter, whose older brother was a Marine, felt a sudden, inexplicable jolt of respect. "Thank you, sir," he stammered, before melting back into the crowd. Jacob's gaze swept the room, not as a guest, but as a sentinel. It was a professional habit, ingrained and automatic. He identified exits, choke points, potential threats. He saw Amelia, radiant in a crimson dress, holding court with a group of her friends, her laughter bright and carefree. He saw Marcus, moving from group to group, the gracious host, the center of this universe. Marcus was accepting the Philanthropist of the Year award, a tribute to his carefully curated public image. The irony was a bitter pill. Jacob had spent a lifetime in the service of others, a service that demanded anonymity, while Marcus was being celebrated for a service that demanded an audience. As the evening wore on, the sense of being an intruder began to weigh on him. He wasn't meant to be here. A shadow fell over his alcove. A large man in a black suit, an earpiece coiled into his ear, stood before him. Security. "Can I help you, sir?" the guard asked, his voice a low growl of professional suspicion. "Just watching," Jacob said, his gaze not leaving the main floor. "You don't have a credential," the guard stated, his eyes flicking over Jacob's worn suit. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm not causing any trouble," Jacob said, his tone still quiet, still even. The guard was unimpressed. He placed a heavy hand on Jacob's shoulder. "Let's go, Rambo. The party's over for you." The guard's grip was firm, a deliberate show of force meant to intimidate. But Jacob didn't flinch. He didn't resist. He simply stood, allowing the man's pressure to exist without acknowledging it. It was a technique he had mastered long ago. Absorb the force, become the rock in the river, and let the current break around you. "Sir, I'm not going to ask you again," the guard said, his voice tightening with impatience. The small commotion had attracted attention. Marcus, ever the master of his domain, noticed the disturbance and glided over, a look of curated concern on his face. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" he asked, his eyes landing on Jacob with a flash of genuine annoyance. Amelia, seeing her stepfather move toward the back of the room, followed in his wake, her expression a mixture of curiosity and dread. "Marcus," the guard said, his tone instantly more deferential. "This man doesn't have a credential. He won't leave." Marcus let out a short, theatrical sigh. He looked at Jacob, not as a brother-in-law, not as his stepdaughter's father, but as a piece of trash that needed to be taken out. "It's all right, Frank," Marcus said to the guard, a smug, dismissive smile playing on his lips. "He's with me." "Sort of. He was just leaving." He turned to Jacob, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "I don't know what you thought you'd accomplish by coming here, but you've made your point. Now get out before you embarrass my daughter any more than you already have." Amelia had arrived now, her face pale. She saw the guard's hand on her father's shoulder, the contempt in her stepfather's eyes. She saw the pitying stares of the people nearby, and she did nothing. She stood frozen, a prisoner of her own narrative, unable to speak a word in his defense. She just looked away, a silent confirmation of her stepfather's judgment. It was the ultimate betrayal, not a public speech, but a quiet, personal denial in a moment of confrontation. The guard tightened his grip, preparing to physically escort Jacob from the premises. "I think you should take your hand off him," a new voice said. The voice was calm, but it carried an authority that cut through the ambient chatter like a razor. It was deep, resonant, and held a cold, hard edge of absolute command. It did not request. It instructed. The guard, Marcus, and Jacob all turned toward the source of the voice. Standing there, having just entered from a private entrance, was a man who commanded immediate and total respect. He was tall, ramrod straight, in his late 60s, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore the immaculate dress uniform of a 4-star general of the United States Army, his chest a testament to a lifetime of service, a constellation of medals and ribbons that told a story of valor and leadership. This was General Theron Hayes, the gala's guest of honor and keynote speaker, a living legend in the armed forces, and a man whose presence made even titans like Marcus Thorne feel small. The security guard, Frank, instantly snapped to attention, his hand dropping from Jacob's shoulder as if it had been burned. "General Hayes," he stammered. "I apologize, sir. I was just removing this individual." General Hayes's piercing gaze did not waver from Jacob. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. The crowd, sensing a shift in the evening's gravity, began to quiet down, their attention drawn to the silent drama unfolding in the alcove. The general's eyes moved from Jacob's face down to his arm, to the spot where his sleeve had once again ridden up during the guard's manhandling. His focus locked onto the faded tattoo, the serpent and the dagger. A flicker of disbelief, then recognition, then profound respect crossed the general's face. He looked back up at Jacob, and the hardness in his expression dissolved, replaced by something else entirely. "Ah, my God," General Hayes breathed, his voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I don't believe it." He ignored Marcus completely. He walked directly to Jacob, his polished boots clicking on the marble floor. He stopped a foot in front of him, his posture shifting from that of superior officer to one of man addressing an equal, or perhaps something more. He raised his hand, not to strike, not to gesture, but in the beginnings of a salute. He stopped himself, his eyes flicking to Jacob's plain suit. "No uniform, no salute, no ceremony," the general said, more to himself than anyone else. "That was always your way, wasn't it, Spectre?" The name hung in the air, a word of immense power and mystery. Marcus's smug smile faltered, replaced by a look of utter confusion. Amelia's brow furrowed. What did he call him? Spectre? General Hayes turned his head slightly, his voice now rising, projecting to the silent, watching crowd. "Frank, was it?" he said to the terrified guard. "You said you were removing this individual. You have no idea what a monumental error you were about to make." He turned back to Jacob, his voice filled with a reverence that stunned the onlookers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the hall, "you are in the presence of a hero, a real one, not the kind you read about in press releases, the kind whose exploits are classified for 100 years, because the truth is too hard for most people to hear." He looked at Marcus Thorne, a cold fire in his eyes. "You are hosting a gala to celebrate philanthropy. You are giving a man an award for writing checks. This man," he said, gesturing to Jacob, "paid in blood. He paid in pieces of his soul." A hush had fallen over the entire museum. The clinking of glasses had ceased. The laughter was gone. Every eye was fixed on the unassuming man in the cheap suit and the 4-star general who spoke of him as if he were a legend. "Let me tell you who you were about to throw out of your party," General Hayes declared, his voice ringing with the authority of history. The general gestured for a microphone, which the young waiter, the one Jacob had helped earlier, scrambled to bring. The boy handed it to the general with a trembling hand, his eyes wide with awe as he looked at Jacob. General Hayes took the microphone, but he didn't address the crowd. He kept his eyes locked on Jacob, as if seeking permission. Jacob gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He had not wanted this, but the line had been crossed. The truth, silent for so long, was now demanding to be heard. 20 years ago, the general began, his voice amplified, filling every corner of the vast hall. A special envoy on a diplomatic mission in the Hindu Kush was ambushed. Their security detail was compromised, their position overrun. They were taken hostage by a brutal warlord, held for ransom in a fortress thought to be impenetrable. The official story was that a deal was struck, a quiet diplomatic solution. That was a lie. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The truth is, a team of 6 men was sent in. A ghost team. They didn't officially exist, which meant if they were captured or killed, the United States government would deny all knowledge of them. Their mission was not to negotiate. It was to descend into hell and bring that envoy back, or die trying. The camera in the room, meant to be broadcasting the award ceremony to an online audience, was now fixed on this scene. The director, sensing the raw power of the moment, kept the shot tight on the general, with Jacob just over his shoulder. On screens across the city, people were watching this unfold. The team was led by a man known only as Spectre. The general continued. For 3 days, they moved through enemy territory, hunted, outnumbered 100 to 1. They breached the fortress, a place our satellites couldn't even properly map. They eliminated the entire hostile force, freed the envoy, and carried him on their backs for 50 miles to the extraction point. His voice grew quiet, heavy with memory, but it came at a cost. They were engaged during the extraction. The helicopter carrying them out was hit by an RPG. "Spectre, this man right here," he said, placing a hand on Jacob's shoulder, shoved the envoy and 2 of his own wounded men out of the burning aircraft as it went down. He was the last one out. His leg was shattered in the crash. But he didn't stop. He secured a perimeter, held off the advancing enemy single-handedly until a second rescue bird could arrive, all while bleeding out on a frozen mountainside. He looked directly at Marcus Thorne, whose face had gone from confused to ashen white. The envoy he saved? That was Secretary of Defense Carlson, whose life's work laid the foundation for the very encryption technology your company, Mr. Thorne, now uses to make billions. The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. This wasn't just a story. It was a foundational event for their entire industry. A piece of lore they all knew, but they had never known the most important part. This man's actions that day are the reason half the people in this room have careers. His heroism is a ghost in the machine of your success. The general's gaze then fell upon Amelia, whose crimson dress now seemed garish. Her face a mask of horrified disbelief. His commendations are sealed at a level above top secret. He holds a Distinguished Service Cross, 3 silver stars, and a Purple Heart that he never even bothered to collect. The tattoo on his arm is not a trendy piece of ink. It is the emblem of the Serpent's Dagger Unit. There are only 5 men alive who are authorized to wear it, and the other 4 the most decorated operators in the history of Special Forces. They call him a legend. They call him the man who held the line when the world was about to break. The general lowered the microphone, the silence in the room now absolute, profound, and heavy. It was a silence filled with the deafening sound of a new reality crashing down upon them. Oh, the truth had been spoken, and it had changed everything. The silence stretched a vast, empty space where the glittering, self-important noise of the gala had once been. In this new quiet, every detail was magnified. The stunned, open-mouthed expression on Marcus Thorne's face, his carefully constructed persona of power and benevolence shattered into a million pieces. He looked like a man who had just seen the foundations of his world turn to dust, the tears welling in Amelia's eyes, tracing clean paths through her expensive makeup. Her face was a canvas of dawning horror, the slow, agonizing realization of the magnitude of her mistake. This wasn't just about forgotten father. This was about a hero she had disdained, a giant she had mistaken for a common man. Her public declaration of having only one dad now echoed in her mind not as a statement of love for her stepfather, but as an act of profound, historical ignorance and disrespect. The camera panned across the faces in the crowd. The city's most powerful people, the movers and shakers, the titans of industry and finance, all stood frozen, their expressions shifting from detached amusement to shock, and then to a deep, humbling awe. They were looking at Jacob not as an intruder, but as a relic from a more serious, more honorable world than their own. The security guard, Frank, looked as if he wanted the marble floor to swallow him whole. He stared at his own hand, the one he had placed on Jacob's shoulder, as if it were a foreign object. He took an involuntary step back, his head bowed in shame. General Hayes stepped forward and placed the microphone back on its stand. He then turned to Jacob, and in a gesture that sent a final, devastating shockwave through the room, he brought his hand up in a sharp, perfect salute. It was a breach of protocol to salute a man in civilian attire, but in that moment, it was the only gesture that made sense. "It has been an honor to see you again, Spectre," the general said, his voice quiet but firm. "The honor was all mine, sir," Jacob replied, his own voice steady, betraying no emotion. He simply gave a slow, respectful nod. The tension broke. Marcus Thorne, for the first time in his life, was speechless. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. What could he say? He had been exposed not as a villain, but worse, as a trivial, unserious man in the presence of greatness. Amelia took a hesitant step forward, her hand outstretched. "Dad." The word was a fragile whisper, a question, a plea. All the cold certainty was gone from her voice, replaced by a desperate, childlike need. Jacob looked at his daughter. He saw her tears. He saw her regret. but he did not move toward her. There was no anger in his eyes, only a deep, profound sadness. He had not done this for a reunion. He had not done this for an apology. He had done this because the truth deserved to be honored, even if he did not. He had given her a world of safety and privilege, and she had valued the gift but despised the giver. The lesson was now hers to learn. In the crushing silence of this public humiliation, he had restored his honor not by speaking, but by allowing it to be seen. And now, his purpose here was complete. The final act of the drama belonged to Jacob, and he played it with the same quiet dignity that had defined his entire life. He turned to General Hayes. "Thank you for your words, Theron," he said, using the general's first name in a way that spoke of a shared history deeper than rank. "But I believe I've overstayed my welcome." He looked past his weeping daughter, past his humiliated stepfather-in-law, and his gaze met that of the young waiter, who was still standing by the microphone stand, watching with wide-eyed reverence. Jacob gave the boy a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement, a final, silent transfer of some unspoken code. Then he turned and began to walk away. He didn't storm out. He didn't flee. He walked with the same steady, rhythmic pace of his limp, heading not for the grand main entrance, but for the same shadowed service corridor through which he had arrived. He was retreating from the light, heading back to the quiet world where he belonged. A world of substance, not spectacle. "Dad, wait!" Amelia cried, her voice breaking. She started to move after him, but General Hayes put a gentle but firm hand on her arm, stopping her. "Let him go, young lady," the general said, his voice soft but resolute. "Some things, once broken, cannot be fixed with a single word. You have a lot to think about. You need to decide what kind of person you want to be, and what definition of father you choose to honor." His words were not cruel, but they were true, and they landed with the force of a final judgment. Amelia collapsed into a chair, her sobs echoing in the cavernous, silent hall. Marcus stood beside her, utterly defeated, unable to offer any comfort, for he had none to give. The great Marcus Thorne had been rendered irrelevant. Jacob disappeared into the shadows of the corridor, the sound of his footsteps fading until there was only silence. He had arrived a ghost, and he left a legend. He had won no prize, received no applause. His only victory was the restoration of a truth he would once again carry alone in his quiet life. The narrative concludes here, in the deafening silence of regret, with the hero walking away, not into a sunset, but back into the humble reality he has chosen. He remains vindicated but unchanged, his core of humility and honor intact. He sought no apology and accepted no reward. The real resolution lies with those left behind, with a daughter who must now live with the knowledge of the hero she disowned and the hollow man she embraced. What is true honor? Is it found in the thunderous applause of a crowd, or in the silent, thankless sacrifice of a quiet professional? We believe the answer is clear. Tell us what you think in the comments below. What would you have done in Amelia's position? And if you believe that the quiet heroes among us deserve our ultimate respect, make sure you subscribe to the channel and share this story. You never know who might need to hear it.